and captions, packing tips and travel tips. This is the first time actually that I'm not going to be traveling via an American airport. I'm going to try to use the Tijuana airport. And this is the first time I'm doing that because flights were considerably cheaper. So if anybody has any experience with the Tijuana airport and the CDX, I think that's what it's called in San Diego, send me a message on the chat. What does my travel mean for this class? So I know some of you were already thinking ahead if you paid attention last week when I was going through it. But because I will be in Mexico all of next week and I'm traveling, my flight day is this Thursday, it does affect our class. So for this Thursday, it means this is our last class for a bit, right? There's no class on Thursday. What I'm having you do instead is watch a video for your Canvas activity. So if you already have this period in which we have class in, like, scheduled in your planner and the way you schedule your week, you can use this time instead of having class to watch the video and answer the questions, right? So I want to walk through the steps of what you'll need to do this because it will be a little bit tricky for some of you, right? So this documentary is available for free via one of the subscriptions Cal State LA subscribes us to, right? The streaming service is called Kanopy. And it's one that, by the way, you have access through the Los Angeles Public Library, but also through Cal State LA. They just have a lot of documentaries and foreign films. What you'll want to do, though, is pull up these questions as you're watching, right? As you're watching, answer the questions. But note, some of these questions are not as straightforward, right? The first one is, why was Ishiro Katoaka arrested immediately after December 7th, 1941, the Pearl Harbor attack? That one comes pretty early in the documentary, and this is a factual answer. I need you to tell me what the documentary says. However, the second question is something that is not, you have to think more about. I'm going to ask you, what is the impact of Mary Matsuo using the word incarcerated? She uses the word incarcerated at least once, if not several times. And I want you to think about, what does it mean for her to use that word? Does it make a difference? Does it have an impact when she uses that word instead of talking about internment camps, right? Notice the language that people who were interned used to describe their situation. In the last few years, there's been a move among scholars and people who study this history to talk about the internment of Japanese Americans using different wording, right? Because it has a different impact, is what scholars would argue. So I want you to listen for that and then think about whether it has an impact, right? Does it change the way you look at something when you use different words to describe it? So that's a more open-ended question, and everybody will have a different answer to that. So I want you to note that not all of these questions are just like watch and write the answer, whatever is said in the documentary. I want you to think about some of these. So like I said, watching the documentary, for example, I'm not on campus, right? I'm off campus, and if I just click the link, it takes me to the streaming service, Kanopy. But you'll see that it shouldn't let me play it. Actually, yeah. Right here, right? It has the link. And it says start watching with your public library card or university login. Because this is a paid service, it won't automatically let you watch it if you're off campus. Now, if you try to watch the documentary while you're on campus, it will probably let you watch it. Just there'll be a play button and you can click play, right? So if you watch it on campus, it should be easier. If you're not watching it on campus, it's a little bit trickier. And what you normally do to circumvent that is you have to log into the Cal State LA library. Yep, through the library. And this is separate than my Cal State LA because I'm already logged into my Cal State LA. But as you'll notice, I have to go over here to library. And then usually to access all of the library functions, you have to log on off campus. The way I do it for Canopy is I just go straight to databases, right? There's this button down here that says databases. And it looks like my computer is just being very slow. But once databases comes on, you want to look for the Canopy link, right? So I usually just go to click on the K and I click on Canopy videos. When I do this, it's going to ask me to log in, right? This is the way that I have just gotten used to doing it. There's probably an easier way to do it, but then you just use the same login and password you use for your MyCalStateLA ID. Let me log in. And now the Canopy streaming service pops up. Now, what you can do now is look for the name of the documentary, but what's easier for me is if I just go back to the original link. Now, if I click on this link, now it will let me play it, right? So now I can click play. Now, I'm gonna email you all the instructions for this in case you forget, but also I am recording this class. So if anybody forgets how to log on to watch the video, you're gonna be able to come back to the recording and watch as I do this step by steps. But if anybody has any problems, let me know as soon as you can. That way I can help you troubleshoot. Sometimes I haven't had too many issues with Canopy. A few years ago, I had one student who was not able to watch a video on Canopy at all. And I think it is because they had an older, like really old computer that could no longer do updates. So that might be the case for some of you. So if that happens, you need to let me know. That way I can either give you an alternate assignment or find the documentary through a different source. The key is you shouldn't have to pay for this, right? It's available for free through the library, and you can watch it from any of the, you should be able to watch it from any of the computers on campus, right? So once you click play, I want to show you that it's a very short documentary, very, very short. I'm not going to ask you to invest hours of your time watching it. It's 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes, and it focuses on particularly one family that went through the internment after the attacks on Pearl Harbor. So you're going to watch this documentary and then answer the questions. Easy enough, hopefully. Questions though? No questions on this one? All right, so I'm gonna, at some point this weekend, I will also send another email because next week, like I said, I will be in Mexico all week next week. So I'm not gonna ask you to meet with me or to meet for class next week. There's no class at all next week. However, I will be on Zoom. So I will be on Zoom for our entire class period. The reason I didn't make it mandatory to come to class is because I'm supposed to have internet, but sometimes when you're traveling, especially to a different country, you just don't know what the internet is going to be like. And in the past, when I've done this, that it's been a little bit tricky. The internet has been a little bit tricky. So yeah, no class this Thursday and no class next week at all. However, I am asking you to watch a different documentary next week. This is what you're going to write your midterm paper on. So for your midterm paper, you're watching this documentary. Now, I think one of you had already watched it. For the rest of you, it is available on Netflix, but it's also available on YouTube for free. That way, if you don't have a Netflix subscription, you can still watch it. They made it available for free on YouTube, right? It's just through the Netflix account. So you do have to tell it that you understand, they're giving you a content warning. And then this documentary is longer. This is an hour and 40 minutes. So for this one, you are investing longer than one class period. What I want you to do is watch it and keep the prompt in mind, right? One of the things that will sometimes confuse people is I put the assignment prompt on week 8, although the midterm paper is not going to be due until October 22nd. Right? Because at first I just want you to watch the documentary. Then once we come back to class together, I want to give us time to talk about the documentary and to talk about the paper. Right? I need to give you more instructions on it. But in this paper, you're going to write 2 to 4 pages on the documentary, but include the material from our class. Right? So the question that you're going to write your paper on is, how is today's prison industrial complex, and that is the term used in the documentary, so how is today's prison industrial complex connected not just to the history of slavery, which the documentary will focus on, but how is it also connected to the history of excluding and incarcerating non-white bodies, meaning how is it connected to the history of racism that we've been talking about, right? For example, the history of Chinese exclusion, right? The history of racism in housing, the history of racism against Latinos and Mexican Americans in particular. So yes, Angel, you can totally delay. You can decide next week I don't have history class and not do any of this. But if you watch the documentary and take notes as you're watching it, the following week, you can just focus on writing the paper without having to worry about scheduling in 2 hours of your time to watch the documentary, right? I'm trying to help you out, but at the end, I don't control when you watch it. So a lot of you said this sounds easy, which is great. I don't mean this to be a burdensome assignment. What I want us to practice doing in this assignment is writing an argument, writing a clear argument using historical evidence. Right? Using historical evidence. So the key for me when I grade your paper is, do you make a clear argument that's actually arguable?
Oh my God.
Right? This is not going to be a summary of the documentary. I've already watched the documentary. In fact, I have watched the documentary several times. So I don't need summaries of the documentary. I need to see you using evidence from the documentary and from our class to prove an argument, right? I'm going to ask you to do some kind of the standards. These are going to be double-spaced papers, 1-inch margins, Times New Roman, or whatever the default font is and whatever program you're using. I am going to ask you to cite it, and I'm going to ask you to cite using Chicago style. Now, how many of you have used Chicago style? No one? No one? Not even the history major? I have one history major in class, and nobody's used Chicago style.
I don't think I've used that before, or even heard of it.
Or even heard of it. Okay. This is why I'm making you do Chicago style, because most people have never heard of it. And most of your professors don't really care what citation method you use, because in truth, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you use MLA, for example. That is the style that most of you are used to, MLA. However, for anyone who is in the social sciences, right, the citation method most of your majors use is not MLA. For most of you, actually, the citation style that is preferred in your disciplines is usually APA. Yeah, APA. So I want to introduce you to Chicago style, because Chicago is the standard in history. So if you've used APA, Chicago style is way easier, way easier. You're going to be a pro at this if you've already used APA. For MLA, there's not actually a ton of difference in the different citation styles. The main difference for Chicago style is that you use footnotes or endnotes. And I want to show them to you because they sound scary when I say it out loud, but it's actually not. It's really simple. I'm going to make Chicago style so simple for everybody, right? That in fact, it's going to be easier than any other style you've already used. Aha, see, some of you have used it. So typically in MLA, right? Let's say you're writing your paper and you have a brilliant quote you're using, right? Any direct quote from the documentary, any quote from a lecture or from a book, you want to cite, right? You put quotation marks around it. And typically in an MLA style, you put in parentheses whatever you're citing, right? You have a brilliant quote, and then you have to tell the reader what it is, where this quote is from. So I'm going to pretend that you are using a quote from the Hinojosa book. You use her last name and then you put a page number, right? Typically in Chicago style, this is the standard method of citing. Right? Sorry, in MLA, right? Chicago style decided that this is too clunky. It's kind of distracting when you're reading a history book, for example, and every sentence is cited, because we cite a lot in history, right? We use a lot of quotes in history. So in history, that's too distracting. So we decided, no, we're not going to use that. Nothing in parentheses. Absolutely nothing in parentheses. Instead, you put the quotes around the sentence you're citing, and then the cursor's at the very end. And then what you do, I'm going to lower this a little bit so that, and make this bigger so that everybody can see. Okay, so the cursor's at the end of the sentence. In a Word file, what you do is you go to References, and then you want to insert footnote. Now, you technically can do an endnote in Chicago style, but I want to show you the footnote because most of you will really like the footnote. All right, so I'm going to click this button. What it does, it automatically starts numbering your citations. So it puts a 1 at the end of the sentence, and then it creates a space over here at the bottom of the document for you to put the information of what you're citing, right? In a footnote, you want to put everything you typically put in like a bibliography. The name of the author, the title of the work, a place where it was published, dates, all of that. Because you're citing a documentary, I have made it really easy for this class. All you have to do to cite the documentary 13 is look at the prompt I've given you on Canvas. Because I've given you exactly how you should cite the documentary, and all you have to do is copy and paste. Because typically how you cite a documentary is the name of the documentary, the director, the information, because this is available online, provide a link, and that's it. So I decided, why not? Instead of, I don't care about all of this formatting of the footnote, I care just giving you an introduction to Chicago style. So if you're citing the documentary, all you have to do is come back over here and paste. When you're citing a documentary or any video, you don't have to put a timestamp, nothing. You just have the quote, and then you paste the information in at the bottom of the page. That's it. Now, let's say you're like, okay, professor, but you said we should also cite information from class. So let's say you're summarizing something from class, right? So it's not a direct quote, it's a summary of something from class, right? So you don't put quotation marks around it, but you do have to cite it because it's from class, right? It's some topic we discussed in class. You still go over here to References, and you want to click Insert Footnote again. What it does then is, if you go back here, see, it puts the 2 and then creates a space at the bottom of the page. Now, you can come back over here to the prompt and look at how I tell you to cite a lecture, right? Now, you do need to tell me which lecture you're citing, right? Give me the title of the PowerPoint is what I want here. But everything else, I've already formatted it for you. Right? You need my name, the title of the lecture, and that it was a lecture, that it was given at Cal State LA, and that it was this semester. So you can go back over here, paste it, and then just give me the title of the lecture. So I don't know. I'm making up one because I don't remember any of my titles right now. Chinese exclusion. That's it. Right? So this is most of the stuff you'll probably be citing, but if you run into issues citing anything else, I'm happy to help you. And the reason I said that a lot of you will like this footnote style is because you will probably have several quotes, several things you're citing. And what Chicago style does is give you the illusion. I mean, it does take up some space at the bottom of the page. There's not really that much space, but it gives you the illusion of having to write less. Okay, now I'm looking at your questions. Hold on a second. Angel says, what if we cite the same thing? Aha, that's an excellent question, Angel. So let's say this third citation, this was another quote from the documentary, right? Well, honestly, I would just go back over here and copy and paste it. You can just copy and paste it. Copying and pasting is simple enough. But let's say, all right, you have this quote from the documentary, and then you have another brilliant quote you've picked out from the documentary. So it's 2 sentences back to back. You go back to references, insert footnote, and now you're citing the documentary again. You could just copy and paste again. No problem with that. That is perfectly good citing. In Chicago style, however, we came up with a different way. This is from back in the day when like everything had to be on a typewriter. When everything has to be on a typewriter, people got lazy, like, because you're not going to type up the whole thing all over again. So what they came up with was a shorthand for this. Instead of typing the whole thing over again, they said, let's just say ibid. Ibid is Latin for the one right above. So by saying ibid, period, you're telling me that you're citing the exact same source as the previous footnote. So I know if I see ibid here, that you're citing the documentary again. Now, if you're looking at ibid and you're like, you're making it too confusing, Dr. Cardona, fine, don't use ibid, just copy and paste. Just copy and paste again. No, so every time there's a new quote, a new thing you're citing, you have to do a new number. Each one has to have a new number. So you shouldn't just insert number 1 again. No, you have to go to references, insert footnote, and it has to have a new number. Every footnote has to have a new number. So let's say this one is the documentary again. I can just say ibid. And if all you're citing is the documentary, right, then all of your footnotes are going to look the same. That's not a problem. Yeah, Hova?
We're doing this for paraphrasing as well, correct?
Yes, yes, yes. So anything you're citing, I always say if you are wondering if you should cite something or not, just cite it. You can never go wrong citing, but also you cite anything that's a direct quote or anything that's paraphrasing, either the documentary, the reading, or the lecture. When you're putting it in your own words, because you didn't come up with the information on your own, you should still cite it. Yeah.
And what if it fills up most of the page?
That's fine.
Okay.
That is perfectly fine. In fact, in history, that sometimes happens. I have read articles where there's like 3 lines of actual text, and then the rest of the page is all citations. It's all footnotes. That's fine.
Okay.
Here, though, if you're really citing that much, you're probably summarizing too much. You're summarizing too much, and there's not enough of your analysis. But because it's never in this kind of paper is never going to take up the whole page, unfortunately for you all. But but if it did, it wouldn't matter. In history, it doesn't matter. Let's see, what else do I see here? Say for 3 of our citations, the influence from the same source, do we still paste the same citation? Yes, so I think I answered that question, Valerie. Yeah, you can copy and paste the same one or use IBID, right? So let's say you're writing the paper and you forget all about IBID. That's fine. So, copying and pasting the original citation is not that big of a deal. It's not like taking up too much space. You can just keep using it over and over again. And it looks like it's taking up space, but doesn't matter. Just keep using it. This is perfectly acceptable citation. Yeah, I know. They developed these things with the typewriters. For the second citation, couldn't we just read? Oh, no, I already answered that question. Yeah. So don't worry, I'm going to go over citation again because the reality is most of you are not going to write your papers until like the weekend before it's due. So I will go over this again, but at least the recording will be here so I can refer people back to it. And I'm hoping that at least some of you next week, when you watch the documentary, that you'll get started on your papers, right? If you have a lighter week with other classes next week, why not at least do an outline of your paper? That way you're a little bit ahead. If anybody actually writes the paper and is done with it, you can also email it to me. Email it to me or visit me during the class hours, and I'm happy to read your draft and give you comments on it. But I will also accept them over email. Right, with any assignment in this class, but especially papers, you can always email me a draft, and I am ecstatic. I'm really happy to give you comments on it. So the good news is you don't have to show up for a Zoom class on Thursday or next week at all, unless you need to talk to me. I will be on the Zoom next week. Week 9, when we come back, we'll have class. We'll have class and we'll talk about the documentary. We'll talk about the paper. That week 9, will probably be just devoted to just the paper and the documentary without any new material in class. Right. Other questions right now? Notice that because we're working on watching these documentaries and starting to work on some of this writing, you don't have any reading, right? This week, no reading. Next week, no reading. The week after that, no reading, right? So you don't have to go on perusal. That's why, though, if you're behind on any of the assignments, now is a good time to catch up. I do accept late work. There might be a penalty for it, but most of the time, I tend to not even penalize late work unless it's really, really late. I'm going to be at a conference. It's actually a good time to be submitting work. If I'm bored at this conference, I just pull up my computer and I start grading. So it's a great time to submit any work that maybe you fell behind on. Right, whether it's on perusal or it's one of the Canvas assignments, it's a good time to catch up. By the way, I did notice that on perusal, every so often, it's only happened like 2 or 3 times. Every so often, perusal thinks that one of your comments is inappropriate. I've been sent a couple of emails telling me a student has submitted a comment that's inappropriate. So it tells me, right? I go look at it and there's absolutely nothing inappropriate about your comment. If that ever happens to you, don't worry about it. I go in on there, I approve the comment, and I give you the credit for it. You don't have to, try to get perusal to accept your comment. It's dumb, but it does notify me when that happens, and I give you credit for that. No. Mia's asking a good question. Can you resubmit an assignment for a better grade? No. Part of it is just because I allowed late work in order to keep my workload manageable. Once you've submitted a paper, it's done. It's submitted. Once it's graded, you cannot resubmit. Yeah. But keep those questions coming. I'm happy to answer any of those questions over email or on the chat here. So, okay, before we start before we get into the internment of Japanese Americans in the US, we need to talk about the Great Depression. It's an incredible moment in American history and global history, right? And it marks the separation of the two world wars. And sometimes, like for me, it's really easy to talk about the world wars as one and kind of skip the Great Depression. But this is an important moment in history, and it impacts the topics we've been talking about. It impacts how people are treated. It impacts the social fabric of the country, because for the first time you have significant unemployment and poverty and starvation at rates that are so big that the government has to step in. The government has to step in and provide relief for the people of the United States, right? And it's one of the largest social programs that are launched by the U.S. government. Well, the largest up to that point, and will only probably be rivaled by Johnson's Great Society in the 60s. But it happens because several things are occurring at the same time, right? One, the stock market crash, right? There's the stock market crash in October 1929, and millions of people lose their jobs, right? Wealthy people lose their fortunes to the point where you did have people committing suicide because they lost all their money. But it wasn't just the wealthiest people in the country and in the world who lost all their money. It meant companies lost all their money. And when companies lost their money, people lost their jobs. Right? There were long lines at soup kitchens, whenever anybody had a job, the applicants, there was a lot of unemployment, and unemployment cut across class. It didn't matter what your income bracket was at the time, you were going to be affected by the unemployment and the stock market crash, right? Some people didn't lose their jobs, but a family member lost their jobs, a friend lost their jobs. And so it ends up having an impact in every corner of American society. On top of the stock market crash, you also have the Dust Bowl in the Midwest, right? Part of what creates the Dust Bowl is an overproduction of farmland in the Midwest, right? They had been farming too much without rotating crops, without making sure that the land could continue to yield. You can overuse the land. If you're if you're farming the same thing over and over again, eventually you deplete the nutrients in the soil. This is why people use things like fertilizer, why they rotate crops, because this way you get the soil to replenish the nutrients. You're helping the soil to replenish the nutrients and continue allowing you to grow things on it. Right? Well, for a long time that hadn't been done all over the Midwest. And so the soil was completely depleted of its nutrients, so people could no longer farm on it, right? And so depleted was the soil that it's all just dirt. It's all just dirt, and wind creates this just like tornadoes of dust that people were living in, right? So it has a big impact because you can't grow on large chunks of land in the Midwest. You couldn't grow anything anymore, right? The soil was so depleted. It means you can't sell your crops, you can't make money off of it, but it also means that food production, right? People are not able to buy a lot of the crops that were provided to the rest of the country by the Midwest, right? People depended on some of that wheat, some of that corn that was being grown in the Midwest. With a bad year of growing that, then it impacts everybody, right? The food availability all over the country decreases. You also have years of drought in the late 20s and through the 30s. Not enough rain, not enough rain. And if you don't have enough water, even if the soil can produce crops, you're not going to be able to yield it, to grow anything without enough water, right? Now, there were places where the soil hadn't been depleted enough, where maybe they managed to get water enough through some waterway. There wasn't enough rain, but maybe through a lake or some body of water nearby, people are able to get some water to their crops. But there's also waves of plagues that affect the crops in the Midwest. If anybody's grown up in a farming community, these are all things that, like, if you have one of these things happening a particular year, it can be really devastating. But when you have all of these things happening simultaneously, it is absolutely horrendous, right? It impacts everybody in some way or another, because this is how we get food onto everybody's tables. This is large populations of people. And crops farming is a really delicate, it's just a really delicate business, right? Personally, I know some of this because my family comes from farmers. Both of my grandfathers were farmers in Mexico. My dad's done some farming in Mexico. And one year I visited him when he was farming in Mexico, and he wasn't home some days because he needed to like spend the night with the crop to like babysit it, to make sure that the temperature didn't get too cold, because if it was too cold and it got frost, then the crop's going to die. Or he's babysitting it because there's some sort of insect that really likes to eat certain like wheat or certain corn, and you have to make sure that you're not going to let these insects kill the crop, and you have to like be there babysitting it. It's a ton of work, and I only got a glimpse of it, right? So this means that even people that normally, were not connected to the stock market, right? They don't work for a company whose stock is traded at the stock market, right? Because if you're a farmer, the impact of a stock market crash will be less, right? If you're a small farmer, it will be less than people that work at one of these factories or the people that are investing in the stock market crash. You would have still been impacted, but the impact would have been mitigated by other things. But because of the overproduction, the drought, and the plagues, you even if you're not being impacted by the stock market crash, you're now being impacted by this, right? And it's not 1 or 2 years of this; it's year after year after year of this. So you all can tell me you remember this from high school history classes. What happens then? How do these people in the Midwest deal with the Dust Bowl? What do you do if you're a farmer in Kansas or in Iowa, and year after year, your crops, you have nothing? You can't feed your family. Your kids are starving. You're starving. There are no other jobs. You can't go to a factory, let's say, and work because those companies are laying off people. So what do? Then move. Stress, high stress. These are actually periods in which you see spikes in domestic violence, spikes in alcohol consumption, right? The kinds of things that are signs of really, really high stress. And so really, yeah, Jackson, what most people, or what a lot of people do, is you have to move. You have to move. And for a lot of people, because these were farmers, a logical place to go is California or the American Southwest, where farming is a large industry, right? California had already become a largely agricultural state, right? But same things were happening in Arizona, New Mexico, where there was agricultural work. right? Some of them did try to find industrial work going to the city, so maybe going to Chicago or New York. Part of a problem for anybody seeking industrial work, though, is that there are not a lot of jobs already, right? After the stock market crashed, a lot of those companies lay off people. And these Midwesterners would have heard about that. They would have heard that there are no jobs up in Chicago, that people are already starving over there, or in Kansas City. There were already unions in some of these places. Yeah, there were, but things are so bad that the safeguards that the unions have were at times limited. They were at times limited. But the unions do become important during this interwar or during this depression period. Dino, that's an important point. They are organizing to try to stop some of the abuses that companies do during the depression. For example, wages lower. A lot of companies use the depression either because they really were not making as much money, or sometimes it's an excuse to lower wages. And the unions fought that. Or they're laying off people without following proper protocol, protocols as per union contracts, and the unions fought that. Yeah. But for a lot of these Midwesterners, the Southwest, and especially California, feels like a better option. Right? They're not going to make as much money as they did in their farming because they're working for somebody else, but it's at least work that they recognize, that they know how to do. And so a lot of these people are leaving the Midwest, not for cities necessarily, but for agricultural areas, specifically the Southwest and California, right? So a large number of people coming from Oklahoma, from Nebraska, right? Kansas, even up from North Dakota. But especially this Midwest region is coming to the Southwest. So you have the transformation of a lot of these agricultural communities and places that are still agricultural, right? Fresno, Bakersfield, a lot of this, like, what do we call it? Oh goodness, now I don't know what we call it. I forgot. The Central California, or sorry, this, what is this region called now? Why is this escaping my mind? Oh goodness. I forgot the word we use for it on TV all the time. Well, whatever. This agricultural region in the middle of California, in the region that's not coastal, where we have a lot of our agricultural system. The Central Valley, the Central Valley will count. So all of these regions, all of a sudden you have all of these Midwesterners migrating to these places, and they are not welcome. Why are they not welcome? If you're living over here, maybe in Los Angeles, maybe in Bakersfield or Fresno, and all of a sudden you get hundreds, at first it's hundreds, later you get thousands of people from Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, why are you not going to be happy to see them? Yes. One, they're coming for work at a time in which it's hard to find work anywhere. So if you're living in California and you're seeing these large groups of people coming, looking for jobs, you're thinking, now what happens when I lose my job? I'm not going to have options, right? Like, they're coming here to take jobs, and they're coming in such large numbers that there's not enough housing, right? The issue of housing has always been a really important one, and there is not enough housing for these people as it was. And a lot of these agricultural communities, housing was not very good to begin with, right? A lot of those agricultural workers that are Mexican migrants or Asian migrants are living in huts, are living in very poor housing. And so there's not housing for these Midwestern migrants. So they end up, because they continue to come in really large numbers, right? if you're starving, wherever you're starving, and you have the option of moving, right? You're going to do it. If your other option is starving and dying, you're going to do it. And so you end up with large refugee camps in all of these agricultural communities. And they are both a infrastructure problem, right? And that, what are we going to do with all these people? We don't have enough housing for them. Where are we going to put them? But then also a political problem, because anybody who's already in California is looking at this as, hey, representative, governor, hey, politicians, do something, get these people out, right? But it's so big, right? The number of people are coming to California that the population of the Southwest increases by 25%. Right? So that's a large increase in the span of like a decade, less than a decade of both the stock market crash and the Dust Bowl. Right? So it's a significant problem. And now in all of these places, you have even more tension than there was before, right? Because these Midwesterners looking for jobs are coming looking for jobs in places where you already had migrant populations working, right? These jobs, these agricultural jobs already were not paying very much. Conditions were not very good. But now you have migrant populations from Mexico, from Asia, and from the Midwest, all competing for the exact same jobs, right? And demands are increasing that someone do something about it, right? Because there just were not enough jobs for every single person looking for it in this time. One of the solutions, right, was, all right, if we have these white Midwesterners looking for jobs that Mexican migrants were doing, let's get rid of all the Mexican migrants that were doing those jobs. Those jobs should go to Americans. This is the same pattern that happens every time that there is any economic downturn, right? If there's high unemployment, bad economy, there's always a backlash towards immigrants. Problem here, though, is the way these programs are going to get implemented, right? So the government launches a repatriation program. They call it a repatriation program to basically send these Mexican migrants that were living in places like California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas back to Mexico, right? Not yet. So this is under Hoover. This is under Hoover, but FDR is coming. He's coming. FDR will inherit this. So how do you do that? How do you send Mexican immigrants back to Mexico? Well, you fire them from their employment, right? But here's the problem with this repatriation program. What do you do? How do you differentiate between Mexicans that were living in California before 1848 and new wave of Mexican immigrants, right? The American Southwest, this whole region is populated with a ton of people that never moved, right? The land they were on in 1848 became American land. They stayed. And how do you tell one person apart from the other? When really, in terms of skin color and appearance, there was no real difference. So what do you do? Well, It doesn't matter, right? People were being deported, being sent back to Mexico, who had never set foot in Mexico, who were born in the United States, who were of Mexican heritage, in that a few generations back, their families had lived in what was then Mexico, but they never moved, they never went anywhere. And all of a sudden, people are being rounded up just because they look Mexican and sent back to Mexico. So some of these migrants had been in the country illegally, but a lot of these people were American citizens, and they were sent back and they were deported to Mexico just because they looked Mexican. The largest program that did this, I hate using the term, but this is the legal name for the program, was Operation Wetback. That word, wetback, is a derogatory term, right? It's a racial slur. But that was what the government called this program of deporting mass number of Mexicans to Mexico, was Operation Wetback. And part of the problem is the inhumane nature of it, and the fact that a lot of American citizens end up being deported. But okay, let's say a lot of people are not going to complain about these deportations, right? About the Operation Wetback. So people did complain, by the way, people did complain, but a lot of people were not going to complain. They didn't. So let's look at the kind of pay people were getting. So let's say you're somebody from Oklahoma, you're trying to get a job in the fields in California doing agricultural work, because that's the kind of work you're used to. Let's look and see how much you would be getting paid. So this is charts, by the way, this is from the Online Archives of California. So this is our records in California for how much people got paid all over California by county, working in different kinds of fields. So let's look at avocados. How much would you get paid picking avocados? If you are in Santa Barbara, you're getting paid 35 cents. 35 cents per hour and per the amount you're picking. If you are a woman picking avocados in Orange County, you're getting paid 33 cents. Even at the time, right? That's not a lot of money. That's not a lot of money. Someone give me another crop. What crop are you interested in seeing how much it paid?
Grapes.
Let's look at the grapes. Let's see. All right. If you are picking grapes in Fresno, you're getting paid not by the hour, not per the day. You're getting paid for how much grapes you're picking, which is common in a lot of these crops. You're getting paid $1.50 per ton. Each ton of grapes you pick, you get $1.50. That looks to be maybe one of the best paid ones, because when that picking was done by Chinese migrants, they were getting paid less, $1 per ton. Right. Let's see some of these other places. So you can see here, some places you're getting paid 25 cents an hour for picking grapes. Over here, you have in Santa Clara County, you're getting paid 35 cents, 40 cents. So the lowest some of these people are getting paid is 25 cents per hour. And the highest might be that like $1.50 per ton. Well, it depends how long it takes you to pick those many. Let's see, almonds. Oh, and almonds are really, by the way, almonds require so much water to grow. Let's see, almonds. The pruning, to prune the trees, you get 20 cents a tree. I don't know what some of, by the way, it's smudge hulling. I don't know what that is, but for knocking, you would get $3.50 per board. Pruning and knocking, no, for picking, you would get paid 30 cents an hour for picking almonds. Or 35 cents if you're in Placer. San Luis Obispo, you're getting 40 cents. So similar, 30 to 30, between 30, 35 cents. Oh, let's look at the oranges. Let's see. Oh, these are a little bit, these are a little bit higher depending where you're at. You get 50 to 60 cents in Tulane. No, Tulare. Ooh, but look at this, 20 cents if you're in LA. In Orange County. For picking oranges, you would get paid 20 cents an hour. Imperial County, you would get 50 cents. Are any of you signing up to go pick oranges at this time? Melons was the last request I got here. Melons. Ooh. Okay. The honeydew melons, for cultivating them, is 35 cents. For culling them, this must be harder work. You'd get 60 cents an hour. But everyone else is getting 30, 35 cents per hour. Maybe as low as 25 cents. And that's the thing. That's what you see with a lot of these crops. People are getting paid as low as 25 cents an hour for what is really hard labor out in the sun, constant work, no stop. Remember that the housing is not good. They're living in shacks or just out in the open. 25 cents or even 35 or 45 cents an hour for this kind of labor is not even enough to pay for food. Right? It's not even enough to pay for food. But right, you might think, well, that some of that might be considered abusive. 25 cents for the kind of labor they're doing, and you're not even making enough to buy food for your family. How could they get away with that? Why didn't the California government, why didn't the US government step in and do something about these horrible wages? Why could some of these large farms get away with paying 25 cents an hour? A lot of you know that answer. Why? Why could they get away with those kinds of wages? Some of it is racism. It's always, that kind of work has always been paid very low because it's immigrants that are typically doing that kind of work. Well, one, it's really hard labor. So you can usually, people that can get different kind of work that's not in the fields will usually find the other work. It's too difficult. And because it's immigrants, many who are illegal, who are not white, that's one reason they've been able to get away with that during different time periods. But remember, here you have all these white people, all these white men and women coming from the Midwest, and they're still getting paid only 25 cents to pick some of these crops. You're right. I haven't asked the question. All right, this can be the question. Why were wages so low during this time period? Why were agricultural wages so low during the Depression in California? Despite the fact that at this point, you have a lot of Midwesterners, white Midwesterners, trying to get these jobs. Right? It can't all be racism because some of these people are white. So why? How could they get away with these kinds of wages? So if you, by the way, if you wrote an answer before I asked the question, but I mean, before I formally made this the question of the day, you're good. You don't have to type it in again. Like I see. Like Justin, that's the correct answer. Well, the economy was different. That's true. And it would have been a lot lower wage anyway at this time, but it wouldn't have been 25 cents unless the particular conditions existed. Inflation. So some people are saying. Yeah, I know. I would be willing to pay 10 cents per burger again. And like gas cheaper. Gas hasn't gone up to like over $6 where I'm at yet, but I hear that some of you in Los Angeles are paying like close to $7 per gas today or right now. Oh, some of you are giving me kind of specialized answers here. So where were you? I'm like, you could give me some of these complex answers. Where were you when I was asking a minute ago before I made it the question of the day? Wait, some of you have seen $7.50 for gas? $7.50 for gas? No way. Oh, I mean, I'm not that surprised. I'm just outraged. Like fudge. That's a lot. But okay, if you haven't put in your answer for the question of the day, which is how could they get away with paying 25 cents an hour for some of these crops, which is really low wages, even for the time period, even for the 1930s, is very low wages. So yeah, a lot of you are have the answer there. It's a combination of this is always pretty low paid work to begin with, but also the number of people looking for these jobs, right? No matter how low the pay was, right? People were willing to take the job, right? Because you had thousands of people in some of these refugee camps, right? Thousands of people looking for any job. Just looking for any job. So this is where a lot of employers could afford to pay to keep wages stable, right? Some of these employers did not need to cut wages to make money, right? But they see that opportunity because there's an abundance of labor, right? For every opening they have, there might be dozens or hundreds of people looking for that job, right? So this influx of migrants from the Midwest drive the wages of farm work down. They are driving and also the greediness of some of these companies taking advantage of that because people are willing to take it, right? If you're coming from somewhere in the Midwest where you were starving already, right? Now all of a sudden you're in Bakersfield and someone's offering you 25 cents an hour for picking melons. 25 cents an hour is better than $0 an hour. And so you take it. Right? However, and this is going to be my last point of the day, a lot of people did not. I mean, people who were desperate took the job, right? But a lot of people begin seeing this is unfair. Right. For some of these agricultural companies, remember that some of these companies that own the people that own these fields, the melon fields, the almond fields, some of these fields, they're not owned by small farmers, they're owned by companies. Right. And some of these companies are actually making a lot of money because of the Dust Bowl in the Midwest. Right. There's less competition. They can actually sell their fruit and vegetables for a higher price than they used to. because there's a lack of, right? Because the available avocados is lower, right? The number of avocados are lower because the people in the Midwest are not growing some of these things. So the companies have been making money and still driving the wages of some of these workers low. So people organized. People were organizing to demand better pay and better working conditions from these companies, right? In the middle of the Depression in 1933, there's waves of strikes. This one in particular, I wanted to highlight was the 1933 cotton picker strike. There's people picking cotton in Oakland, California, and they go on strike demanding better wages. Right? And I want to show you really quick here what their demands were. Right, at this time, and by the way, this was written up in the late 30s and 40s this was part of FDR's New Deal program to put writers to work. So they actually paid people to write up some of this stuff that was going on. So at this point, a lot of those cotton fields in Bakersfield were being picked by Mexican migrants, right? And so this is part of what the writer's describing here, that Mexicans were still the chief source of migratory workers in the California cotton fields, but things were changing, right? At the opening of the 1933 cotton picking season, he says, we find the Cannery and Agricultural Workers Industrial Union providing militant leadership for the Mexican pickers, drawing up and presenting their demands to the growers, threatening a valley-wide strike if these demands were not met. Right. So this is actually some of the union organizers that have been working in the cannery, in the factories that make the cans, and the industrial union workers. They're trying to help the cotton workers organize together. So they have these three demands from the cotton company: a wage rate of $1 per 100 pounds of cotton picked, recognition of the union, and the abolition of contract labor. So they don't want contract labor anymore. They want to be paid $1 per 100 pounds of cotton picked, and a recognition of the union, right? And notice number one is that the wage increase. This would have been a wage increase for the cotton pickers, right? So we know there was a strike. So we know that the company says, no, we're not going to increase your wages with tons of people looking for work, right? So how do you think this goes? Do you think the workers end up getting what they want here in 1933 or no? It's a difficult situation, right? Like one of the things that is highlighted in this article is that a lot of these cotton pickers don't have savings, right? So they decide to go on strike, but how long can a strike go if people are going to run out of money and aren't going to be able to like hold the strike, right? Now the unions had been raising money to try to help the pickers so that they could stay on strike, right? Let's see, the growers reply. The cotton growers refused the demands made by the CAWIU. They said 60 cents was the maximum they could pay. Right. So the cotton pickers want $1 per pound for 100 pounds, and the company's like, no, we will pay you 60 cents per 100 pounds of cotton. The union does call for the strike. The company rallies around. There were some tension between the workers themselves about, should we accept the 60 cents or not? The government just does try to get involved, try to end the strike. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll down to where I can give you the answer of what happens to the strike. Jeez, this writer was long-winded. there's a lot of mediation attempted. You really, especially with like some of these crops being so necessary, so in demand, the government was stepping in to try to prevent. So there's a compromise. So the fact-finding committee in San Francisco made its official report. The wage was raised to 75 cents per 100 pounds of cotton. So this is a compromise between the 60 cents and the $1 rate that the workers asked for. So neither side got what they want, but the cotton pickers did get a raise, right? 75 cents per 100 pounds of cotton was still a raise for them. So I don't know how we can interpret this. If this was a victory, I would call this a victory for the workers. Even though they don't get the dollar they were demanding, they still got a wage increase. And it was because they're organizing, right? Because they're organizing, and actually then the strike was successful to some extent there. Okay, I will stop there. So remember that we don't have class on Thursday or all of next week, but you do have 2 documentaries to watch. One for this week that you have to answer a Canvas assignment for, and then the documentary 13 for next week. Sound good? All right, I'm stopping the recording.